This is Station Monday, your map through the chaos, your compass in the storm. I'm Atlas, and if you're hearing this, you've been left behind. Let's not sugarcoat it. Command has pulled out, the extraction isn't coming, and the lines on your map might as well be lies. You've been abandoned in a place where the rules are made by whoever holds the bigger gun, and the world doesn't care whether you live or die. But I do. I'm here because someone has to be. Someone has to keep you moving, keep you thinking, and keep you alive. Now, let me be clear. I don't have all the answers. I'm not watching you through some magic camera, and I'm not about to give you guarantees. What I do have is information, scraps, whispers, fragments of intercepted chatter, and observations from those brave enough to call in. That's what I'll share with you tonight. It won't be perfect, and it won't be pretty, but it'll be something. Out here, something is better than nothing. You're in a war zone that doesn't care about borders or uniforms anymore. The streets are riddled with traps, the skies are watched by drones, and the ground itself feels hostile. Supplies are scarce, trust is scarcer, and every decision you make is a gamble. I don't need to tell you what happens if you lose. But here's the thing, you haven't lost yet. You're still breathing, still moving, still fighting. That means you've got a chance, and I'm going to do everything I can to make sure you use it. For those of you unfamiliar with this broadcast, Station Monday is exactly what it sounds like. A lifeline for soldiers left to fend for themselves. I've been in your boots, and I know what it's like to feel the walls closing in. I know what it's like to wonder if the next step will be your last. That's why I'm here. I've seen too many good people fall because they didn't have the right intel, because they trusted the wrong landmarks or ignored the wrong signs. I won't let that happen to you, not if I can help it. Tonight, we've got a lot to cover. I've been picking up some concerning reports about new enemy tactics and shifting patrol patterns. If you're in Sector 4, listen closely. I've got updates that could mean the difference between making it out and getting caught in a kill zone. For those of you scavenging near Grid 7, there's a convoy site that might be worth your time, but it's not without risks. I'll also be sharing some survival tips for dealing with the chemical fog that's been spreading through low-lying areas. It's nasty stuff, and you'll need to be smart if you want to avoid it. Before we dive in, a word of advice. Trust your instincts. The terrain out here is as much your enemy as the patrols and drones. A clear path isn't always safe, and a safe path isn't always clear. Pay attention to the details, the patterns of light, the sounds that don't belong, the way the air feels heavier in certain spots. These things matter. They could save your life. I want you to remember something. You're not just a soldier. You're a survivor. The difference is more than just a word. It's a mindset. Soldiers follow orders. Survivors adapt. Soldiers look for the next mission. Survivors create their own. Out here, the rules of engagement have changed, and the only thing that matters is making it to the next sunrise. It's not about winning battles anymore. It's about staying in the fight long enough to find a way out. Let's talk about the big picture for a moment. The landscape you're navigating isn't just dangerous. It's actively working against you. Roads that were clear yesterday are mined today. Bridges that held steady last week are crumbling now. Even the weather seems like it's conspiring to trap you. I've heard reports of sudden storms rolling in, cutting visibility to zero, and leaving behind trails of sludge that stick to boots like glue. If you're not prepared to adapt, you're not going to make it. But adaptation isn't just about gear or training, it's about mindset. It's about looking at every obstacle and asking yourself, what can I use here? What can I learn from this? A broken radio isn't just a piece of trash, it's a potential decoy. A shattered building isn't just rubble, it's cover. Every piece of this hellscape has a use if you're willing to find it. That's what survival is, not just enduring, but innovating. I know it's tempting to give in to the weight of it all, to think about the friends you've lost, the orders that didn't come, the home you're not sure you'll ever see again. But those thoughts are anchors, and out here you can't afford to be weighed down. Focus on what's in front of you. Focus on the next step, the next breath, the next decision. That's how you keep moving. That's how you stay alive. This war zone is a labyrinth, and the exit isn't marked on any map. The only way out is through, and the only way through is together. That's what Station Monday is about. Connecting the dots, finding the paths, and guiding you through the maze. I won't pretend it's easy. and I won't promise we'll all make it. But as long as I've got this microphone, as long as you've got ears to hear me, I'll keep trying. One step at a time, one broadcast at a time, we'll find our way out of this. If you're in the field right now, listen carefully. There's a new threat you need to be aware of: decoy flares. They're showing up across multiple sectors, and they're not just a distraction. These are enemy tactics designed to exploit one of the most basic instincts we have: to move toward light in the dark. Soldiers have reported seeing these flares burning in open areas, some scattered along roads, others perched in the middle of seemingly abandoned intersections. The trap is simple. You approach, you assess, and by the time you realize what's wrong, they've got you in their sights. The flares aren't the typical type you'd expect. They're inconsistent. The burn time varies. Some die out in seconds. Others seem to linger just long enough to tempt you into the open. That's your first clue. A real flare has a steady burn. It's reliable, consistent. These are not. Watch for flickering, for uneven bursts of light, and for signs that the flare isn't acting the way it should. The enemy knows you're trained to spot traps, and they're counting on you to hesitate just long enough to make their move. Reports suggest these flares are often surrounded by additional hazards: mines, tripwires, even hidden sniper stationed to pick you off the moment you step into the open. They're bait, plain and simple, but they're bait designed to mimic hope. The kind of hope that whispers, maybe there's a supply drop nearby. Maybe someone's signaling for help. That hope will get you killed. If you see a flare, don't move toward it. Observe, analyze, and then move away. There's nothing there for you but danger. In Sector 4, the situation is especially precarious. Recon has confirmed that these decoy flares are being used in tandem with drone patrols. The drones hover just out of earshot, scanning for movement while the flares light up the area. If you're exposed, the drones will find you long before the enemy does. If you see a flare in Sector 4, assume you're already being watched. Your best option is to find cover, stay low, and move laterally, never straight back, never straight forward. Zigzag, use the terrain, and avoid creating a predictable path. There's another wrinkle to this tactic, and it's one that's caught more than a few survivors off guard. Some of these flares are equipped with motion-activated triggers. That means the moment you get close, you're not just risking a sniper's bullet or a drone sensor. You're at risk of setting off a hidden device. Mines, explosives, or even gas dispersal units have been reported in these setups. If you must pass through an area with flares, assume the ground around them is rigged. Look for disturbed soil, unnatural patterns, or anything that seems out of place. Your eyes are your first defense. The enemy isn't stopping with flares. They're doubling down on supply zones, turning what should be lifelines into death traps. Soldiers in Grid 7 have reported supply drop zones littered with anti-personnel mines. These aren't just random placements. They're calculated, positioned to maximize damage and chaos. The crates themselves are rigged in some cases, designed to detonate when tampered with. I can't stress this enough. Do not trust clean streets near a supply crate. The more perfect the setup looks, the more suspicious you should be. For those of you who still need to scavenge, there are ways to work around these traps. The first is distance. Use binoculars or scopes to scan the area before approaching. Look for obvious signs of tampering: wires, unusual marks on the crate, or even scratches on nearby surfaces that might indicate recent activity. If you can, use a long pole or an improvised tool to probe the area ahead of you. The slow work, but slow is better than dead. If you're dealing with mines specifically, remember this: they're not invisible. Mines disturb the ground they're placed in, leaving subtle signs that something's been buried. Look for areas where the soil seems loose or recently disturbed, patches of dirt that don't match the surrounding terrain. In urban areas, mines might be hidden under debris or placed in high-traffic zones where survivors are likely to walk. If you spot one, don't assume it's alone. Mines are rarely set individually, they come in clusters. Treat every step as a potential risk. Now, let's talk about the mindset you need in these situations. The enemy is banking on your desperation. They know you need supplies, that you're hungry, exhausted, and willing to take risks. That's their weapon against you, your need. Don't let them use it. Stay disciplined. Think 3 steps ahead. If a situation feels wrong, it probably is. Trust that instinct. It's there for a reason, and it's kept you alive this long. Remember, the landscape itself can be a tool. If you're forced to detour around a flare or a suspected trap, use the environment to your advantage. Fallen trees, natural ditches, and even the shadows cast by the flares themselves can provide cover. Move carefully, stay low, and keep your eyes on the ground as much as the horizon. The more aware you are of your surroundings, the better your chances. There's no shame in retreat. If you come across a setup that feels too dangerous, back out. Find another way. The enemy wants you to feel trapped, like there's no other option but to move forward into their kill zone. Prove them wrong. You're not a pawn in their game. You're a survivor, and survivors make their own paths. Let's talk about getting your bearings, because knowing where you are and where you're going is half the battle. Maps can lie, landmarks shift, and the terrain is changing faster than most of us can keep track. That's why you need to focus on what doesn't move, the constants in the chaos. For many of you, that's going to be the overgrown radio tower in Sector 6. If you've been relying on old maps, it's marked as Alpha Point. If you're lucky enough to still have a compass, it sits just north-northeast of the collapsed highway bridge. Here's why the tower matters. First, it's tall enough to spot from almost any open ground in the sector, making it a reliable point of reference. Second, it marks the beginning of what we believe to be a safer corridor, a stretch of terrain less patrolled by enemy forces and with minimal environmental hazards. I say safer, not safe, because nothing out here is guaranteed. The corridor isn't marked, and it's not a straight line, but it leads toward a potential extraction route. If you're near the tower, you're on the right track. But getting there isn't as simple as heading north and hoping for the best. The area around the tower is a hotspot for drone activity. These aren't just reconnaissance drones, they're equipped with heat sensors, motion detectors, and, in some cases, active deterrents like flash grenades or tear gas. The good news is they have a pattern. They tend to sweep in circular routes, moving outward from the base of the tower. The key is timing. Watch the drone's movement, track its rotation, and move only when its back is turned. If you're patient and deliberate, you can avoid detection. The tower itself isn't without its own risks. The surrounding terrain has been hit hard by recent bombings, leaving it unstable and unpredictable. Sinkholes have been reported within 100 meters of the base. They're often hidden by debris or loose soil, so step carefully. If you're traveling in a group, space out, don't cluster together. One misstep could take out more than just the person who made it. There's also the matter of collapsed terrain. The closer you get to the tower, the more likely you are to encounter areas where the ground has given way entirely, forming pits or craters. Some of these are shallow enough to climb out of, but others go deep enough to swallow you whole. If you find yourself trapped, look for jagged edges or protruding roots. They can provide handholds for climbing, but avoid using any rope or gear that looks abandoned. The enemy has been known to rig these with tripwires, turning your escape into a death sentence. Let's talk about the vegetation around the tower. At first glance, it might look like your typical overgrowth, vines, shrubs, the kind of stuff you've been slogging through for weeks. But reports suggest that some of the plants in this area have been tampered with. There are rumors of trip lines disguised as vines, pressure-sensitive roots, and even plants coated in some kind of irritant. If you brush against one and start feeling a burning sensation, stop immediately. Find water and rinse the area. Don't rub it. The irritant spreads through friction. For those of you thinking about climbing the tower, let me save you some time and grief. Don't. The structure is compromised. Rust has eaten through the supports, and the vibrations from drone activity have made it even less stable. Climbing might give you a better view of the surrounding area, but it's a gamble you don't need to take. Besides, you don't need to see the entire corridor to navigate it. You just need to know where to start and what to avoid. Once you've reached the tower, your goal is to head west-southwest along the tree line. This path will keep you out of sight from most patrols and drones while still moving you closer to the extraction point. Be cautious, though, the tree line isn't consistent. There are gaps where you'll need to cross open ground, and that's where you're most vulnerable. If you find yourself exposed, drop low, stay still, and wait for the right moment to move. One more thing about the tower. It's a magnet for activity, not just from the enemy but from other survivors. Some might be looking for guidance, hoping to use the tower as a rallying point. Others might have less altruistic intentions. If you encounter anyone near the tower, assume they're as desperate as you are. Desperation can make people dangerous. Keep your distance and don't engage unless you have no other choice. Your mission isn't to make friends, it's to make it out alive. The radio tower is a beacon, but it's also a trap for the unwary. Approach it with caution, use it as a guide, and don't linger longer than you need to. This isn't a place to rest or regroup. It's a waypoint, nothing more. Remember that, and you'll stand a better chance of reaching the corridor and, eventually, safety. Now, let's shift focus and talk about what you might find along the way. Scavenging is survival, plain and simple. If you're out there with an empty pack and nothing but a knife or a single round left in your magazine, then you already know desperation is a dangerous motivator. That's why you need to approach every potential supply site with a plan. Let's talk about one that's worth your attention but demands precision. The bombed-out convoy at Grid 12 Delta. This convoy was hit hard, likely by airstrikes or drones, but it wasn't obliterated. That means there's a chance some of the cargo survived, and from the chatter I've picked up, it was a military transport carrying ration packs, medical supplies, and small arms. The kind of things that can keep you alive for another week or give you the edge in a firefight. But don't let the promise of those supplies blind you to the risks. This site is far from safe. First, the convoy is in open terrain. There's little natural cover for at least 50 meters in every direction. Before you even think about approaching, scout the area. Look for drone patrols overhead. These drones are likely equipped with thermal imaging, so staying hidden isn't just about breaking line of sight. It's about staying cool. Move during the cooler parts of the day or at night if possible, and stick to shaded areas where the thermal sensors are less effective. Next, let's address the convoy itself. The vehicles are scattered, most of them flipped or torn apart, but that doesn't mean they're harmless. Reports suggest the enemy has started wiring wreckage like this with traps, motion sensors, tripwires, and even pressure plates under seemingly innocuous debris. If you're approaching the convoy, don't take a single step without sweeping the ground in front of you. A stick, a length of pipe, anything that lets you test for hazards without putting your weight on it first, use it. And don't assume one clear step means the whole area is safe. These traps are often placed in clusters. The supplies themselves are likely concentrated in the central transport truck. This is the largest vehicle in the convoy, partially intact but with its cargo area exposed. Here's the catch. The truck has enemy markings spray painted on the side, a clear indication it's been tampered with. The markings could mean anything: an active trap, a warning to their own patrols to avoid the area, or even a decoy meant to draw in survivors. Approach with extreme caution. When you're inside the truck, or what's left of it, be efficient. Grab only what you can carry and what you actually need. Don't waste time trying to pry open locked cases or searching for every last item. Look for high-priority supplies: sealed rations, first aid kits, ammunition, and water purification tablets. Anything beyond that is a luxury you probably can't afford to carry. Keep your pack light and your movements quick. Now, about those sensor mines I mentioned earlier. These are small, disc-shaped devices buried just under the surface. They're designed to detect pressure, sound, or vibrations, making them incredibly effective against anyone rushing in unprepared. Here's how you deal with them. First, look for signs of disturbed earth, loose soil, patches of dirt that don't match the surrounding terrain. These are likely spots where the mines have been planted. Second, if you've got any reflective material, foil scraps, broken mirrors, even the shiny side of a ration wrapper, use it to catch the sunlight and sweep the ground in front of you. The sensors often have a metallic casing that can glint in the light, giving away their position. If you do trigger one of these mines, your reaction time will determine whether you live or die. Most of them have a delay, a split-second window before detonation. Drop low, roll away from the source, and cover your head. The blast radius is usually small but lethal if you're directly above it. Avoid running, as that creates vibrations that can trigger other mines nearby. Let's talk about the enemy presence. It's unlikely this site has been abandoned entirely. Patrols have been spotted in the area, possibly using the convoy as a bait trap. These patrols are typically small, 2 to 4 soldiers, but don't let their size fool you. They're heavily armed and often accompanied by drones. If you hear movement or spot them before they spot you, your best option is to fall back and wait. Let them clear out before you make your move. Engaging them head-on is a last resort. Lastly, consider your exit plan before you even arrive. Open terrain means you'll be exposed on the way out, especially if you've triggered any alarms or traps. Identify your nearest cover: a tree line, a ditch, even the wreckage of another vehicle, and be ready to move fast. Keep your head low and your pack tight. Supplies are useless if you don't live long enough to use them. The convoy at Grid 12 Delta is a gamble, but it's one that might pay off if you're smart and cautious. Just remember, no amount of supplies is worth your life. If it feels wrong, it probably is. Trust your instincts, stay sharp, and don't let desperation cloud your judgment. Let's move on. There's more ground to cover. Let's get into what the enemy's been up to, because every move they make is a piece of the puzzle you're trying to survive. Over the past few days, intercepted chatter and survivor reports have highlighted something critical: the area they're referring to as the corridor. This stretch of land appears to be their next kill zone. From what I can piece together, it's a narrow route with natural choke points, heavy patrol presence, and strategically placed traps. If you're in the vicinity, avoid it at all costs. Here's what I know. The corridor is situated just north of the industrial ruins at Sector 9. It's a path that used to be a highway but has since been swallowed by the terrain. Landslides have narrowed it to a series of winding trails, with the edges crumbling into deep ravines. The enemy is banking on survivors trying to use it as a shortcut, and they've been fortifying it accordingly. Drones sweep the area constantly, and there are reports of sniper nests concealed in the cliff faces. The goal is clear: funnel survivors into a trap where every step forward is a gamble. If you've already entered the corridor or are too close to turn back, you'll need to adapt quickly. First, know the drone patterns. They tend to patrol in overlapping grids, moving in figure-8 patterns to maximize coverage. If you're caught in their range, your best bet is to stay still and use natural cover: rock overhangs, dense vegetation, anything that disrupts their line of sight. Drones are fast but not infallible. They rely on programmed routes, so if you can time your movements to their blind spots, you stand a chance of slipping through. The real threat in the corridor, though, isn't the drones. It's the snipers. These aren't just opportunists taking potshots from a distance. They're professionals, trained to read terrain and anticipate movement. They'll use suppressors, making it nearly impossible to locate their position by sound alone. The key to avoiding them is unpredictability. Don't move in straight lines, and don't linger in open spaces. Snipers thrive on patterns, and the more you break yours, the harder you are to hit. Now let's talk about the traps. Survivors who've made it out of the corridor report finding tripwires strung across narrow trails, often hidden beneath loose dirt or fallen leaves. These wires are connected to a variety of devices: explosives, signal flares, even small noisemakers designed to alert patrols. If you're navigating these trails, you need to sweep the ground in front of you with every step. Look for unnatural breaks in the dirt, subtle glints of metal, or debris arranged in suspiciously deliberate patterns. The choke points in the corridor are another major hazard. These are tight spaces where the trail narrows to single-file passage. They're perfect ambush sites, often covered by both snipers and drones. If you're forced to pass through one, take your time. Look for alternative routes, even if they're less direct. A detour through thick brush or a climb over unstable rocks might seem like a risk, but it's better than walking straight into a firing line. One of the more concerning reports about the corridor involves environmental hazards. Survivors have mentioned strange chemical residue in certain areas: blue-gray stains on the ground and vegetation that seem to shimmer under sunlight. Contact with this residue causes immediate irritation to the skin, followed by dizziness and nausea. It's unclear whether this is an enemy tactic or a side effect of earlier bombings, but the result is the same. Stay clear of any discolored ground or plants. If you're considering using the corridor as a route to an extraction zone, you need to ask yourself one question. Is the risk worth the time saved? Because make no mistake, this route is designed to bleed you dry. Even if you make it through the drones, the snipers, and the traps, you'll be depleted mentally and physically. That's exactly what the enemy wants. They're playing the long game, banking on survivors being too worn down to resist when the time comes. Don't give them that advantage. There is, however, a safer alternative, though it's not without its own challenges. The southern riverbank runs parallel to the corridor, and while it's not as direct, it offers more opportunities for cover. The terrain is uneven, with plenty of dips and natural barriers to break line of sight. The downside, the slow going, and the river itself can be treacherous. Strong currents, slippery rocks, and sudden drop-offs make it a challenge, especially if you're carrying gear. But compared to the corridor, it's a far better option. If you're forced to cross the river at any point, do it at the shallowest point you can find. Avoid sandbars, they're often unstable and can collapse under your weight. Keep your gear secured and your movements deliberate. The last thing you want is to lose your supplies or your footing in the water. Once you're across, stick to the tree line for maximum cover and keep moving west. The enemy's strategy in the corridor is clear. Create a bottleneck, drain your resources, and force you into a no-win situation. But they're not invincible. They're predictable in their methods, and that predictability is something you can exploit. Stay sharp, think 2 steps ahead, and don't let them box you in. You've got options. Use them. Let's keep going. There's more ground to cover. We need to talk about the land itself, because out here, the ground under your feet is just as dangerous as the enemy bearing down on you. Over the last few weeks, there's been an uptick in reports of chemical fog rolling through low-lying areas. This isn't natural mist or morning dew. It's something far worse. Survivors have described it as a thick, yellowish haze that clings to everything it touches. If you've seen it, you already know what I'm talking about. If you haven't, count yourself lucky, but pay attention because it's spreading. The first thing you need to understand about this fog is that it doesn't behave like normal weather. It doesn't roll in with the wind or dissipate when the sun rises. Instead, it seems to pool in specific areas, valleys, ditches, and the ruins of buildings where air circulation is poor. This is deliberate. Someone, likely the enemy, has figured out how to weaponize the environment itself, turning terrain into a trap. Contact with the fog causes immediate symptoms. Survivors have reported a burning sensation in the eyes and throat, dizziness, and severe nausea within minutes of exposure. Prolonged contact leads to disorientation, weakness, and, in some cases, unconsciousness. If you're caught in it, your priority is to get out. Don't wait to see how bad it gets. Don't assume you can tough it out. Move. If you see the fog from a distance, change your route immediately. Don't try to skirt its edges or find a shortcut through it. The boundaries of these fog banks aren't clear, and what looks like a safe distance can change in seconds. Watch the way it moves. Survivors have described it as alive, shifting in ways that seem unnatural. It can climb terrain, seep through cracks, and spread along surfaces you wouldn't expect. Treat it as though it's actively hunting you, because in a way it is. For those of you already carrying gas masks, you're one step ahead, but don't assume you're invulnerable. The fog has been known to corrode filters over time, reducing their effectiveness. If your mask is older or hasn't been properly maintained, it might not protect you as long as you think. Check your equipment regularly. Replace filters if you have spares, and if you don't, avoid the fog altogether. If you're caught without a mask and you have no choice but to pass through, you'll need to improvise. A damp cloth over your nose and mouth won't give you complete protection, but it can buy you a few precious minutes. Use whatever clean water you have to soak the cloth, and tie it securely. Move quickly, but don't run. The fog reacts to movement, and the more you disturb it, the faster it seems to spread. Navigating the terrain within these fog zones is another challenge. Visibility drops to almost nothing, and the ground underneath is often unstable. Pits, loose rubble, and hidden tripwires are common in these areas. If you're forced to move through the fog, keep one hand free to feel your way forward. Use a stick or pole to test the ground before you step. It's slow, painstaking work, but speed will get you killed. There's another layer to this. Survivors have reported strange phenomena within the fog. Sounds that don't belong, whispers, footsteps, even the distant hum of machinery. It's disorienting, and whether it's real or some effect of the chemicals, it doesn't matter. The result is the same: confusion, hesitation, and mistakes. If you hear something, ignore it. Focus on your exit. The only thing you need to trust in the fog is your own instincts. Beyond the physical dangers, there's the psychological toll. The fog isolates you, cuts you off from your surroundings, and makes you feel like you're moving in circles even when you're not. It's easy to panic, to second guess every step and waste precious time. Don't let it. Pick a direction and commit to it. If you've marked your exit beforehand, keep it in mind. If you haven't, aim for higher ground. Fog rarely climbs beyond a certain point. Now, let's talk about prevention. The best way to survive the fog is to avoid it altogether, and that starts with knowing where it's likely to form. Watch for signs of recent deployment, unusual discoloration on vegetation, chemical smells in the air, or scorch marks on nearby surfaces. These are indicators that the enemy has used fog in the area before and might do so again. Keep track of these locations and plan your routes accordingly. For those of you traveling in groups, stay close but not too close. The fog has a way of forcing people to scatter, and once you're separated, regrouping becomes almost impossible. Use rope or some other tether to keep connected without bunching up. If someone falls behind, don't stop. Get clear first, then figure out how to reconnect. Sounds harsh, but hesitation in the fog can kill you both. Chemical fog is one of the cruelest weapons you'll face out here. It's invisible until it isn't, deadly without making a sound, and it preys on your fear as much as your body. But it's not unbeatable. With the right mindset, the right tools, and a clear plan, you can outlast it. You've made it this far, and that tells me you're capable of more than you think. Let's keep moving. There's still more you need to know. Let's talk about where you can catch your breath, even if only for a moment. There are many places out here that deserve the word safe, but there are a few that might give you the edge you need to keep going. One of those is the derelict subway system at Grid 5 Kilo. It's not exactly inviting, but it's out of sight, it's defensible, and it's one of the few places that isn't actively crawling with enemy patrols. That said, safety always comes with strings attached, so let's get into the details. The subway entrance you're looking for is marked by a collapsed overpass and what's left of an old ticket booth. It's easy to miss, especially with the overgrowth creeping in from all sides. But if you see a rusted set of stairs leading down into the ground, you're in the right place. Be cautious as you approach. The overpass rubble has created blind spots, perfect for ambushes or hidden traps. Take your time clearing the area before you commit to going underground. Once you're inside, the first thing you'll notice is the darkness. Even with a flashlight, the tunnels swallow light like a black hole. You're going to feel the weight of it immediately, silent, oppressive, and heavy in a way that makes you second guess every step. That's normal. The tunnels aren't trying to hurt you, but they will if you let your nerves get the better of you. Keep your movements deliberate and your focus sharp. The subway system has two main levels. The upper platform is relatively clear, with a few old benches and shattered glass scattered around. This is where most survivors stop, but it's also where they're most exposed. The platform offers no real cover, and its open layout makes it an easy target for anyone, or anything, coming down the stairs. If you need to rest, don't do it here. The lower level is where you'll want to go. To reach the lower level, you'll need to find the emergency maintenance stairs. These are usually marked by faded red signs or old hazard tape. The stairs are steep, narrow, and slick with moisture, so take them slow. Once you're down there, you'll find a network of maintenance tunnels running parallel to the main tracks. These tunnels are cramped and claustrophobic, but they're also defensible. If you're traveling in a group, assign someone to keep watch while the rest of you rest or regroup. One set of eyes on the only entrance can make all the difference. There are risks, of course. The subway system hasn't been maintained in years, and structural integrity is a serious concern. Survivors have reported partial collapses in some sections, especially near the junctions where multiple tunnels converge. If you hear the faint groan of shifting earth or the rattle of loose concrete, get moving. Don't wait to see if it's a minor tremor or a full collapse. The tunnels aren't forgiving, and hesitation will bury you alive. Air quality is another issue. The deeper you go, the thinner and more stagnant the air becomes. If you start feeling lightheaded or short of breath, it's time to retreat to higher ground. Some sections of the tunnels also have pockets of gas, likely methane or something worse. If you smell anything sharp or chemical, avoid the area entirely. A single spark could turn the entire tunnel into an inferno. Then there's the water. Parts of the subway system have flooded, leaving pools of stagnant, murky liquid that range from ankle deep to waist high. These pools are more than just an inconvenience, they're hazards. The water conceals sharp debris, unstable footing, and, in some cases, live wires. If you have to cross a flooded section, use a stick or pole to test the depth and the ground ahead of you. Take off your pack and hold it above the water. The last thing you want is to lose your supplies to a misstep. You'll also want to keep an eye out for signs of recent activity. Survivor markings, old campfires, or discarded supplies are clues that someone else has been through recently. That could mean an ally, but it could just as easily mean someone dangerous. Approach any signs of life with caution. If you're alone, don't engage. If you're in a group, send one person ahead to scout while the rest of you stay hidden. The subway isn't just a hideout, it's a crossroads. The maintenance tunnels connect to several exits scattered across the sector, each leading to a different part of the grid. These exits can be a lifeline if you're trying to evade pursuit or navigate toward a specific destination. However, not all of them are functional. Some have caved in, others are blocked by rubble, and a few have been deliberately sealed off. Always have a backup plan in case your chosen exit isn't usable. Despite its risks, the subway system at Grid 5 Kilo is one of the few places where you can catch a few minutes of rest without constant fear of being spotted. But don't let that lull you into complacency. The subway is a temporary refuge, not a permanent solution. Use it to regroup, resupply, and plan your next move. Once you're ready, get back to the surface and keep going. There's no safety in standing still. Let's move on. There's more you need to know. Pay attention, because what I'm about to tell you could mean the difference between outmaneuvering the enemy and walking straight into their line of fire. Over the past 48 hours, there's been a noticeable shift in their patrol patterns. These aren't random movements or standard sweeps. They're calculated, faster, and far more coordinated than before. It's clear they've adapted, and now it's your turn. The first change is in their formation. Patrols are no longer spread thin over large areas. Instead, they're operating in tight, overlapping grids, often with 3 to 5 units working in tandem. These groups aren't just covering more ground, they're actively funneling survivors into predetermined zones. If you've been relying on gaps between patrols to slip through, those gaps are shrinking. You'll need to change your approach. Let's break it down. These patrols move with precision, sticking to a strict timing system. They're working in rotating patterns, which means if you're watching closely, you can predict where they'll be next. Take note of their speed and direction. Most of the time, they'll clear an area in 10 to 15 minutes, then loop back to ensure no one's doubled back behind them. If you can stay hidden during that first pass, you'll have a brief window to move before they circle around again. Now, about their gear. Reports suggest these patrols are equipped with enhanced audio and thermal sensors. That means they're listening for even the faintest noise and scanning for heat signatures that betray your position. You'll need to minimize both. Keep your movements slow and deliberate. Avoid sudden bursts of activity that could draw attention. If you're in an open area, lie flat and stay still. The human body doesn't register as clearly on thermal imaging when it's close to the ground or surrounded by cooler surfaces. Their drones have also changed. They're faster, quieter, and more precise. These aren't just aerial reconnaissance tools anymore, they're hunters. They've been spotted working in pairs, with one sweeping the area while the other hovers, waiting to track any movement. If you see or hear a drone, freeze immediately. Watch its movements and don't assume you're safe just because it's moved out of sight. These drones are programmed to return and double-check areas they've already scanned. Another thing to note is the use of bait. These patrols have started planting items in strategic locations, unopened ration packs, seemingly discarded ammo, even backpacks that look like they've been abandoned by other survivors. These are traps. The moment you move toward them, you're exposing yourself, and it's likely the patrol is watching from just out of sight. If you come across anything that seems too good to be true, assume it's a setup and leave it alone. There's also something unsettling about the way they're moving. Survivors have reported seeing patrols stop abruptly, as if listening or waiting for something. Some have described them standing motionless for long periods, weapons at the ready, before suddenly changing direction. It's almost as if they're being guided by something we can't see. Whether this is a new command system or some other form of coordination, the result is the same: unpredictability. Don't rely on old patterns or assumptions. Adapt to the new reality. If you're forced into an encounter, your priority is escape, not engagement. These patrols are heavily armed and better equipped than most survivors. Fighting them head-on is suicide unless you have no other option. Instead, use the environment to your advantage. Narrow spaces, dense vegetation, and uneven terrain can slow them down and disrupt their formation. If you're in a group, scatter and regroup at a prearranged location. The enemy may be able to track one or two of you, but it's harder for them to chase multiple targets moving in different directions. If you hear the sound of drones or vehicles approaching, listen carefully. Their engines carry a distinct pitch, one that rises and falls depending on their speed and proximity. Use this to gauge their distance and direction. Move when the sound fades and stop when it gets louder. Remember, their technology gives them an edge, but they still rely on basic tactics. Stay unpredictable and you force them to make mistakes. The most disturbing reports I've heard involve nighttime activity. Patrols have started operating under the cover of darkness with increased frequency, using night vision and infrared equipment to maintain their advantage. Survivors have described eerie scenes of patrols moving silently through ruined buildings or abandoned streets, their footsteps muffled, their presence only betrayed by the faint glow of their equipment. If you're moving at night, you need to be hyper-aware of your surroundings. Shadows are your friend, but they're also your enemy. Use them sparingly, and don't linger in one place for too long. Finally, keep in mind that these patrols are not invincible. They're systematic, but that system creates vulnerabilities. They're predictable if you're patient enough to study their movements. They rely on technology that can be disrupted or evaded with the right tactics. And most importantly, they underestimate the resourcefulness of survivors like you. That's their biggest weakness, and it's one you can exploit. Stay sharp, stay quiet, and stay ahead of them. They may have the advantage of numbers and equipment, but you have the advantage of necessity. You're fighting to live. They're fighting to maintain control. Never forget that. Let's keep moving. There's more to cover, and time is not on our side. Let's shift gears and talk about tools, what you have, what you can find, and what you can make. Out here, the difference between surviving another day and becoming just another casualty often comes down to what you're carrying and how you use it. You don't need the best gear or the latest tech. What you need is to make the most out of whatever you've got. Let's dive into a few essentials and some overlooked items that could save your life. First, let's talk about reflective tools. Mirrors, bits of polished metal, or even shards of broken glass. These might seem like junk, but they're versatile. Use them to check around corners without exposing yourself, signal allies from a distance, or even distract drones. If you angle a reflection just right, you can throw off a drone's sensors, confusing its targeting system. It's a temporary solution, but sometimes all you need is a few seconds to make your move. Next, the humble multi-tool. If you've got one, you already know its value. If you don't, start looking for one. A multi-tool isn't just a convenience, it's a lifeline. From cutting wires to prying open locked containers, the range of uses is endless. The pliers can help you disarm traps, the knife can double as a weapon, and the screwdriver can turn a pile of scraps into something functional. If you find a broken multi-tool, don't discard it. Even damaged components can be repurposed. Duct tape is another unsung hero. If you find some, don't let it go. A roll of duct tape can patch up a torn pack, reinforce the soles of your boots, or even create makeshift bandages when combined with cloth. It's durable, waterproof, and endlessly adaptable. Carry it with you and learn how to use it creatively. It's not glamorous, but it works. Let's move on to one of the more specialized items, EMP grenades and jammers. These are rare, but if you come across one, prioritize it. EMP devices can disable drones and other electronics in a small radius, giving you a brief window to escape. Jammers, on the other hand, interfere with enemy communication and tracking systems. The catch? Both have limited range and duration, so timing is everything. Don't use them unless you're sure they'll make the difference. Now, a word about improvised tools. You're not always going to find what you need in perfect condition. Sometimes you'll have to make do with scraps. For instance, a broken flashlight can be turned into a directional signal using its reflective casing and a bit of ingenuity. An old battery combined with wire and steel wool can start a fire. Even a stripped piece of cable can become a snare or a tripwire. Survival isn't just about finding tools. It's about seeing potential in what others overlook. If you're scavenging in urban areas, pay attention to the small, forgotten places. Vending machines, storage lockers, and even abandoned vehicles can hold valuable items. Don't just look for obvious supplies like food and water. Search for things like lighters, batteries, and fabric. These might not seem critical at first, but when you're in a bind, they can be game changers. An old car's side mirror becomes a periscope. A seatbelt buckle turns into a makeshift blade. Think beyond the obvious. Another critical tool is cordage, rope, paracord, or even strong twine. This might sound basic, but its uses are endless. You can secure supplies, create traps, or rig pulleys to move heavy debris. If you're lucky enough to find paracord, remember that its inner strands can be used for more delicate tasks like sewing or fishing. Always carry some form of cordage, even if it's just strips of fabric tied together. Now, let's talk about water purification. Clean water is scarce, and you can't always trust streams or puddles, no matter how clear they look. Portable filtration systems are ideal, but if you don't have one, there are other options. Boiling is the most reliable method, but if that's not feasible, look for purification tablets. In a pinch, even a small piece of charcoal from a campfire can filter out some impurities. Combine it with a cloth to create a rudimentary filter. It's not perfect, but it's better than nothing. Finally, never underestimate the value of a notebook and a pencil. Yes, I'm serious. These aren't just for keeping track of coordinates or jotting down intel. They're tools for remembering, mapping out safe zones, marking enemy patrol routes, and recording survival tips you've learned along the way. A pencil doesn't rely on batteries or signals, and a notebook doesn't crash. When everything else fails, those scribbled notes might be the key to your next move. Your tools are an extension of you. They're not just objects, they're opportunities. Opportunities to adapt, to overcome, and to survive. Keep them close, keep them sharp, and never stop looking for ways to use them. The enemy might have the upper hand in numbers and technology, but you have something they don't: improvisation. And out here, that's worth more than all the gear in the world. Let's keep going. There's still more to cover. Earlier today, I picked up something strange on one of the less used frequencies. A faint broadcast, encoded but persistent, repeating one phrase over and over. The river flows backward. No origin point, no signature, just those words, transmitted with a clarity that felt deliberate. I don't know who sent it or why, but the fact that it's still bouncing around out there tells me it's important. Let's break it down. First, let's consider the literal meaning. A river flowing backward isn't just unusual. It's impossible without some external force. It could mean a shift in the environment, like dam collapses or geological events altering the flow. If that's the case, it's a warning. Changes like that don't happen quietly. They bring with them new hazards: flooded paths, unstable banks, and debris carried downstream. If you're near a river, pay attention. Check the flow, watch for signs of disruption, and be cautious of anything that seems off. The water might not be safe anymore, but maybe it's not literal. Maybe it's a metaphor, a way of telling us something without saying it outright. Rivers have always been symbols of direction, progress, and life itself. A river flowing backward could mean a reversal of fortune, a trap disguised as an opportunity, or even a call to reconsider your path. If you're planning to move toward an extraction zone, double check your route. Look for signs that the area has been compromised. The last thing you need is to walk into an ambush because you missed the signs. There's also the possibility that it's a code. Phrases like this are often used by survivors to mark hidden messages or warn others of danger. If you see the words, "the river flows backward," written anywhere, on walls, rocks, or even vehicles, pay attention to what's around you. These messages are rarely random. They're meant to convey something important, whether it's a safe path, a supply cache, or a threat. Look for other symbols or signs nearby that might give you more context. The timing of this broadcast is what bothers me most. It didn't feel like an accident or a relic of old transmissions. It felt deliberate, as if someone out there wanted it to be heard now, at this moment. That means whoever sent it knows something we don't, and they're trying to share it with the rest of us. But why encode it? Why not just say what they mean? The answer might be fear. If they're being monitored or hunted, sending a cryptic message is safer than an open call for help. It keeps their intent hidden while still reaching those who are listening. Another possibility is misdirection. The phrase might be designed to lead people away from something or toward it. If it's a trap, it's a clever one. Simple enough to spread quickly, vague enough to create doubt. If you're the kind of person who chases every clue, be careful. Not every mystery needs to be solved, especially in a place like this. Sometimes the smartest move is to let it go. That said, ignoring it entirely isn't an option either. The repetition, the precision, the sheer persistence of the signal, it all points to purpose. Whoever sent this knew what they were doing. They wanted survivors to hear it, to react, to investigate. The question is, do you trust the source? And if you don't, can you afford not to? If you're near a river or any body of water, take a moment to evaluate your surroundings. Rivers are lifelines, but they're also boundaries, choke points, and hiding places. The enemy knows this, and they've been using it to their advantage. Patrols often stick to riverbanks, using the sound of the water to mask their movements. Drones hover just above the surface, scanning for heat signatures. And bridges? Forget about it. They're death traps 9 times out of 10, either rigged with explosives or watched by snipers. If you're crossing a river, avoid the obvious spots. Look for narrow sections, shallow fords, or natural barriers that can shield you from view. If the water is moving faster than usual or carrying more debris, that's a red flag. Something upstream has changed, and you need to figure out what before you step in. A backward flow might not be literal, but sudden changes in the water's behavior are just as dangerous. The truth is, we might never know what this message means. It could be a warning, a signal, or just the last desperate act of someone trying to leave a mark before disappearing. But its existence matters. It's a reminder that there are still others out there, fighting, surviving, and trying to communicate in whatever way they can. That alone is worth paying attention to. So keep listening, keep watching. If you see those words, "the river flows backward," don't ignore them. Whether they lead you to safety, danger, or something in between, they're part of the puzzle we're all trying to solve. And out here, every piece counts. Let's move on. There's more ground to cover. Let me give you something recent, something that could change the course of your next few hours. Reports are coming in about enemy supply drones making regular drops at Grid 4 Echo. On the surface, it sounds like an opportunity, untouched supplies left in a relatively open area. But nothing about this war zone is ever that simple. Before you act on this information, you need to understand exactly what you're walking into. The first thing you need to know is that these drops are deliberate. The enemy isn't careless enough to leave valuable resources unattended. These drones aren't just supply carriers, they're bait. Each drop is designed to lure survivors out of hiding into positions where they're vulnerable to ambush. The supplies themselves are real, but they come with a cost. If you're considering going after one of these caches, you need to do it with the understanding that you're stepping into a trap. Here's how these drops work. The drones fly in low, hovering just long enough to release their cargo before ascending again. They don't linger, but they don't need to. The moment the package hits the ground, it becomes a beacon, both to survivors desperate for supplies and to enemy patrols waiting to strike. The patrols don't come immediately. They give just enough time for survivors to think the area is clear before they move in, often with overwhelming force. If you're planning to approach one of these drops, timing is everything. Watch the drones if you can. Track their movements and try to estimate how long it's been since the last package was released. The longer it's been sitting there, the more likely it is that patrols are already closing in. If you can't confirm the timing, assume the worst. Approach with extreme caution or don't approach at all. The terrain around Grid 4 Echo doesn't do you any favors. It's mostly open fields with a few scattered trees and broken down vehicles. Cover is limited and the enemy knows it. They'll use the natural layout to their advantage, positioning themselves where they can see anyone coming from a distance. If you have binoculars or a scope, use them before you even think about moving. Look for movement, unusual shadows, or anything that seems out of place. A stationary figure near the edge of a tree line could be a sniper waiting for someone to take the bait. Now, let's talk about the supplies themselves. The packages are usually marked with bright, unmistakable colors: yellow, orange, or red. This makes them easy to spot, but it also makes them feel too convenient. Survivors who've made it to these drops describe finding a mix of items: sealed rations, medical kits, ammunition, and sometimes small tools. All of it looks legitimate, but the packaging is often pristine, almost untouched. That's your first clue that something isn't right. Supplies left in a war zone rarely look brand new. In some cases, the packages have been rigged. Survivors have reported hidden pressure plates or tripwires attached to the crates. Open the wrong compartment, and you'll trigger a device meant to alert nearby patrols, or worse. If you reach a drop, inspect it carefully before you touch anything. Look for small, out-of-place components, wires running to the ground, or unusual sounds. If you're unsure, don't risk it. Supplies aren't worth your life. If you decide to take the risk, have an exit plan before you move. Identify the nearest cover, whether it's a tree, a ditch, or even a wrecked vehicle, and plan your escape route. Once you've grabbed what you need, don't linger. Get to cover immediately and stay alert for signs of pursuit. The enemy will respond quickly, and their goal isn't just to reclaim the supplies. They're counting on your desperation to make you predictable, to draw you out into the open where they can eliminate you. There's one more layer to this. Survivors have reported seeing strange symbols painted on some of the packages: circles, spirals, or jagged lines. These markings don't seem to correlate with the contents, and their meaning is unclear. Some speculate they're coded messages, warnings, or signals meant for the enemy's own forces. Whatever they are, they add another level of uncertainty to an already dangerous situation. If you see these symbols, take note of them, but don't let curiosity override caution. The symbols might be meaningful, or they might be another form of psychological warfare designed to keep you guessing. If you decide the risk is too great and you're better off avoiding the drops entirely, that's a valid choice. But even then, you can use them to your advantage. Monitor the area from a distance. Watch how the enemy reacts to the drop, how they move, and where they position themselves. Use the information to map out their patterns, to understand their tactics. Sometimes, survival isn't about taking action. It's about gathering intel and waiting for the right opportunity. The enemy's strategy with these drops is clear. Exploit your need to survive. They want you to take the bait, to act out of desperation, to play into their hands. Don't give them that satisfaction. Approach every drop with caution, and if you decide to engage, do it on your terms, not theirs. Remember, the greatest weapon you have isn't in your pack or your hands. It's in your mind. Stay sharp, stay focused, and don't let their traps define your choices. Let's move forward. There's still more to discuss. You've made it this far, and that's no small feat out here. Every step you take is a victory, every breath a testament to your will. But survival isn't static. It's not a single act. It's a constant process, a series of choices that never stop coming. You've adapted, you've fought, and you've endured. But there's always more ahead. That's the truth of this place. It doesn't relent, and neither can you. Take a moment to assess where you stand. Look at the tools you have, the paths you've marked, and the decisions you've made. Survival isn't just about reacting to the world. It's about controlling the small pieces of it that you can. You may not dictate the terrain, the weather, or the enemy's movements, but you can dictate your own. Every choice you make, from where you sleep to how you scavenge, shapes your odds of making it through another day. Remember that this place thrives on your fear. The silence, the traps, the unpredictability, they're all weapons designed to break your resolve. But fear doesn't have to control you. It's a tool just like anything else. Use it to stay alert, to sharpen your instincts, to remind yourself of what's at stake. Let it push you forward, not hold you back. The world you're navigating isn't just hostile. It's changing. The fog, the drones, the shifting rivers, none of it is random. It's part of a larger design, one that you don't fully understand yet. But you don't have to understand it to survive it. Observe, adapt, and stay ahead of the changes. Keep track of the patterns, the anomalies, and the moments that don't feel right. They're telling you something, even if you don't know what yet. You're not alone out here. I know it feels that way sometimes, like the walls are closing in and the sky is pressing down. But you're not. There are others, scattered and fighting just as hard as you are. Some of them are closer than you think. Maybe you've crossed paths with them without even realizing it. Maybe they've left behind the marks and messages you've followed. Every survivor out here is part of the same struggle, whether they know it or not. You've seen what this place does to people. You've seen the traps, the lies, and the betrayals. You know how desperation can twist someone's mind. But you've also seen the other side, the quiet acts of defiance, the moments of kindness that persist even in the darkest places. Don't lose that. Don't let this place strip you of what makes you human. Survival isn't just about staying alive. It's about staying whole. Hold onto your humanity, even when the world tries to take it from you. Your strength lies in your adaptability. You're not bound by the rules of the old world or the expectations of the new one. You're forging your own path, step by step, choice by choice. Every trap you avoid, every drone you outsmart, every moment you refuse to give up, that's a victory. It may not feel like much in the moment, but it adds up. It builds into something bigger, something unstoppable. When you rest tonight, if you can rest, take a moment to breathe. Let the silence settle around you and remind yourself of what you've overcome. The days blur together out here, and it's easy to forget how far you've come. But you're still here. You're still moving. And that's more than anyone out there expected of you. That's your defiance, your proof that they were wrong to count you out. This war zone doesn't want you to succeed. It doesn't want you to hope or fight or dream of anything beyond its borders. But every time you make it another day, you're proving it wrong. You're more than just a survivor, you're a force. And forces, when they gather, when they grow, can't be stopped. Keep that in mind. You're not just surviving for yourself. You're surviving for something bigger, something that may not even exist yet but will, because of people like you. When the sun rises tomorrow and the chaos starts again, face it with everything you've got. Remember the tools you carry, the lessons you've learned, and the strength you've found in yourself. Remember that you're part of a story that isn't over yet. There's more to come, more to fight for, more to discover. And as long as you keep moving, as long as you keep choosing, you'll be there to see it. This is Station Monday, and I'll be here as long as I can. As long as this signal holds, you'll have a voice in the dark, a guide through the maze. You're not alone. Keep fighting, keep moving, and never, ever stop believing that you can make it through. Until next time.